You would not survive Alcatraz for long, not because someone would hurt you, because nothing would. That was the design. A normal prison locks a man away from the world. Alcatraz lets you see it. Every night, the lights of San Francisco burned across the water. You could see windows, moving shadows, people eating dinner. Sometimes you could even hear laughter when the wind turned the right direction. The guards never stopped you from looking. They wanted you to look. Because the human brain can endure pain. It can endure isolation, but it cannot endure hope without control. After a few days, you would start standing at the bars longer than necessary. After a week, you would wait for the lights to appear. After 2 weeks, your thoughts would stop being about the past. They would be about returning to ordinary life, a street, a conversation, a chair in a restaurant, small things. That is when Alcatraz began working. No one shouted, no one beat you. The prison did something quieter. It gave your mind a life it could see, but never reach. And the mind does not tolerate unreachable reality. It starts solving. It keeps solving. It never stops. Eventually, it turns against you. The boat ride took less than 15 minutes. That was important. You were not transported far enough for your brain to accept exile. You watched the city as you left it. Buildings stayed clear. Cars were still visible. You could follow streets with your eyes. The island did not feel remote. It felt close. Too close. When you stepped inside the prison, the processing was fast. Clothes removed, name replaced by number, questions minimal, conversation discouraged. Nothing dramatic happened because drama creates resistance. Alcatraz removed resistance. You were placed inside a narrow cell barely wider than your shoulders. Steel bed, thin mattress, a toilet positioned in full view. Privacy was the first thing to disappear. But the most important object in the room was the window. Small, barred, facing the bay, facing the city. The first night you noticed sound. Not clear sound, fragments. A horn somewhere far away, a faint engine. On certain evenings, music traveled across the water. Your brain filled the missing pieces. You imagined conversations you could not actually hear. You pictured people you could not actually see. The prison provided just enough sensory detail for your imagination to complete the rest. Isolation removes stimulation. Alcatraz fed it carefully. Each night you returned to the bars, not to escape, to watch. Lights switched off in apartments one by one. Ferries followed schedules you began memorizing. You learned strangers without ever meeting them. A woman watered plants at dusk. A late office window stayed lit longer than others. Patterns formed, then attachment formed. You were no longer marking time by days. You were marking time by other people's routines. This was the first fracture. Your mind started living outside the cell, while your body remained inside it. You did not dream of freedom anymore. You dreamed of normality. Walking across a street, waiting in a line, hearing your own footsteps on pavement. The distance between the island and the city was less than 2 kilometers. Some prisoners calculated it repeatedly. They counted strokes it might take to swim. They studied tides they could never test. The problem occupied their thoughts constantly, an unsolved equation running without pause. The brain cannot rest when it believes a solution exists, and Alcatraz always looked solvable. That was the cruelty. A wall ends hope. A visible shore manufactures it. By the end of the first month, prisoners spent more time watching life than remembering their own. The prison had not broken their bodies. It had redirected their minds. And once the mind leaves the present, it does not return intact. Alcatraz did not rely on chaos. It relied on precision. Every morning began the same way. Lights, count, doors, movement. Breakfast always at the same hour, the same walk, the same tray, the same seat. Guards rarely shouted because shouting creates emotion, and emotion creates identity. The prison wanted neither. You were not supposed to hate the guards. You were supposed to forget yourself. Days repeated without variation. Lunch identical, work identical, evening identical. The human brain survives by prediction, but it also survives by change. Without change, the mind stops recording memory. Weeks begin to compress, then months. Prisoners later reported something unsettling. They could remember their lives before prison clearly. They could remember arrival day clearly, but they could not remember Tuesday from Thursday. Time was no longer experienced. It was endured. Conversation was restricted and carefully monitored. Silence became normal. After enough silence, the brain begins creating its own sound. Men talk to themselves quietly at first, then more openly. Not insanity yet. Compensation. The mind filling absence. At night, the routine continued. Lights out at a fixed hour, but darkness did not mean rest, because the city was still there. You could still see the glow outside the bars. Your brain compared two worlds constantly. One moved, one did not. The comparison never stopped. That was the mechanism. Alcatraz did not remove stimulation. It forced contrast. Every day proved your life was paused, while life elsewhere advanced. Over time, prisoners stopped discussing release dates. They discussed routines instead. The routine became reality. Past and future became theoretical. When a human being stops imagining change, the personality begins dissolving. Some men followed orders perfectly, not out of obedience, but relief. Decisions disappeared. You were told when to wake, when to eat, when to stand, when to sleep. Choice faded, and with it, responsibility. A strange comfort developed. The outside world began feeling complicated, loud, unpredictable. A few prisoners nearing release became anxious rather than hopeful. They had adapted to a world where nothing unexpected happened. The prison was no longer only containment. It was structure. And the mind clings to structure, even when the structure is a cage. Then there was D Block. Prisoners called it the Hole. This was where Alcatraz revealed its real purpose. No windows, no outside light. The door closed, and the world ended instantly. The cell was not simply dark. It was absence. After several hours, your eyes searched for shape and found none. Your brain expects edges, shadows, distance. When it cannot locate them, it begins creating them. At first, you heard water that was not running, footsteps that were not there, breathing that did not belong to you. The guards did not speak much during confinement. Meals slid through a slot, contact minimized. Without visual reference, your sense of time collapsed within days. Minutes expanded, hours disappeared. Prisoners attempted counting to measure duration. They always lost count. Sleep fractured. Some slept constantly. Others could not sleep at all. The mind needs external confirmation of reality. D Block removed confirmation. After extended confinement, men reported conversations with people they knew were not present. Not imagination, perception. They answered voices. They reacted to movement in darkness. Panic was common the first days. Worse came later. Acceptance. When a person adapts to hallucination as environment, the boundary between thought and reality weakens. Upon return to normal cells, some prisoners avoided the window. The city now felt unreal. Others stared at it obsessively, as if verifying existence. A few refused to speak for days. The prison had not beaten them. It had reorganized perception. Solitary confinement was not punishment alone. It was calibration. After the whole, routine felt safe. Silence felt comfortable. Control felt necessary. Alcatraz did not need violence to maintain order. The mind, once disoriented, began enforcing the prison on itself. After enough time, something unexpected began happening. Men stopped talking about escape. Not because it was impossible, because it was no longer the central problem. The problem was outside. The longer you lived inside a perfectly controlled environment, the more unpredictable normal life appeared. Inside, every sound had a meaning, every movement had a rule, every hour had a place. Outside was noise, choice, coincidence. The mind had adjusted to certainty. The city you watched each night was no longer only freedom. It was chaos. Some prisoners nearing release grew restless in a different way. Sleep became irregular. They paced not toward the bars, but away from them. A few admitted fear quietly to the prison psychiatrist. Not fear of remaining, fear of leaving. In the cell, you had no decisions to make. Outside, every decision returned. Where to go, what to say, how to behave. Responsibility is heavy after long absence. The prison had removed consequence by removing choice. Now choice was coming back all at once. Guards observed a pattern. The closer a release date approached, the more carefully a prisoner followed routine. Beds perfectly made, movements precise, infractions vanished. It was not discipline, it was preservation. The structure had become psychological support. Some released prisoners later committed small crimes within months, not violent ones, petty ones, theft, trespassing, enough to be arrested again. Not all, but enough to be noticed. The outside world demanded constant adjustment. Inside required only obedience. For certain minds, obedience was easier than freedom. Alcatraz had done something subtle. It had not only confined behavior, it had trained dependence. The body left the island, the structure remained. People often asked why more prisoners did not attempt escape. The water was cold but not impassable, the distance measurable, the city visible. The answer was not physical. The real barrier was mental. By the time a man had spent years on the island, his mind had reorganized around the environment. He woke when told, ate when told, spoke when allowed, watched life instead of participating in it. The habits grew roots. Escape required more than crossing water. It required reclaiming self-direction instantly. That is harder than swimming. Many men stood at the bars for hours, not planning escape, but rehearsing life, imagining conversations, imagining walking into a store, imagining choosing what to do with an afternoon. They were practicing being human again. Because Alcatraz had gradually removed unsupervised choice, a person without practiced choice hesitates. Hesitation kills escape attempts before they begin. The prison never needed higher walls. The visible city did the work. Every night you saw a world moving without you.
Eventually, you stopped trying to reach it. You adapted to observing. That was the final mechanism. A cage is effective when a body cannot leave. Alcatraz became effective when the mind stopped wanting to. The island still stands today, surrounded by the same water and the same view of the city. Visitors walk the corridors and see small cells, steel beds, bars. It looks simple, almost primitive. But the design was never in the steel. It was in the distance. Close enough to measure, far enough to fail. The prisoners were not held by walls. They were held by a daily reminder of a life continuing perfectly well without them. And once a person accepts that, the prison does not need to lock the door anymore.